when I was interviewing these people, I was young, I was in my 20s or early 30s, and a lot of the great people that I interviewed, like Lauren Bacall or Jack Lemmon or Janet Leigh, were older.
This is what I wear. I don't have a lot of jewelry.
It's very understated.
Well, he looks as though he's going to the chair. Well, don't think of the camera.
Don't think of the
Just
camera.
think of me.
And so what I learned most is how to get through the film industry, which is punishing, is, you know, Hollywood is the town without pity. You know, how to get through all that and still be a decent human being. So I learned from them human things more than filmmaking things, I think. A lot of them had maybe alcohol problems and things like that. And so how do you survive? The existential questions are the things that I learned from those people more than film stuff.
Thanks.
I loved interviewing Jack Lemmon because he was, you know, in some of the best films ever made, like The Apartment by Billy Wilder.
Are we dressing for dinner?
You know, just come as you are.
So you're pretty good with that racket.
You should see my backhand. Wait till you see me serve the meatballs.
But he's also a very decent human being, very political man. He cared you know, at a really early stage, he was talking about environmental issues, you know, and human rights and things. So I think he was wonderful.
God bless his soul, and he's not with us anymore.
It's another one.
The story of film was a long time ago, as you know, and it tried to be a passionate history of innovation in cinema. And cinema has continued to innovate. You know, you're shooting on, I presume that camera can shoot 4K. So that has changed since the story of film. New technologies have come along, and therefore I would update the story to talk about new technologies. But there have also been more social changes as well, you know, Black Lives Matter, you know, more emphasis on LGBT rights and things like that. And so I would try to look at how the social and the technological things have influenced cinema. Which movies have captured our times? Did The Joker unsettle you? Did The Babadook scare you? Did you feel the desire in Moonlight? The newness of a fantastic woman? I like the essay form. I don't consider my films documentaries particularly. They're not classical documentaries, you know. I don't follow characters, I don't do interviews, you know. So my voice tends to be in the film. So I think my films are essay films, sort of, you know. I love essay films, you know. You can really take an idea for a walk in an essay film. You know, I think that there is such liberty in an essay film. You know, I studied art history, that was my background. You know, in art history there's classical art, you know, where the bodies are very beautifully posed and they're not showing loads of emotion, you know. And then there's romantic art where loads of emotion is being expressed and the sky is tempestuous and there's lots of feeling. If you then look at cinema, you know, it's hard to say that a film like Casablanca or Gone with the Wind or some of the classics are really classical because they are so emotional. They are, to one degree or another, a melodrama. And therefore I think what they're trying to do is make us feel something really intense, a kind of eruption of emotion. And if that's the case, then they are closer to romantic art and classical art. In classical art and classical films, I think, the emotion is contained and it's balanced. And that's why in the story of film, I suggest that Ozu from Japan is more classical than, for example, Casablanca. Well, I'm quite a passionate person, so I tend to say, to use quite emotional or intense language. You know, I personally, Ozu, I think there are probably better filmmakers than Ozu. I think Imamura, also from Japan, is better than Ozu. But in terms of, if you look at a map of cinema, I think Ozu is somewhere near the center, not over to one side, somewhere near the center. If there's a sort of balance in cinema, he's right in the middle of it. And so from that point of view, if you, I've also argued that Ozu's films are cubist in some way, the way they use space, for example, then you could argue that his contribution to cinema is more than any other filmmaker, even Jean-Luc Godard. The top film, but according to the critics, was Jeanne Dielman of Chantal Akerman. And if you flip back 20 years ago, in 2002, only 3 people in the world mentioned Jeanne Dielman, and I was one of them.
Oh, wow.
And the other 2 were women, so I was the only man in the world who said that Jeanne Dielman was that great, and that was 20 years ago. So I like to think I was slightly ahead of the curve in the recognition of how great Jeanne Dielman is.
I agree, because also some of the filmmakers and movies that appear in the list are really mentioned in your documentaries and in your work a few times. So maybe I think you had an impact on the.
I think a little bit. I think around Jeanne Dielman, and I think there's some other filmmakers who, because I've gone on about them a lot, you know, I think she's coming up. Kira Muratova, you know, great Ukrainian. I've been trying to talk about her for like 25 years, basically, you know, because I think she's so important. So if I can have an influence, that would be amazing. And I think, for example, in terms of recent cinema, the best film that I've seen is Apichatpong's Cemetery of Splendor. So if I go on enough about that, and I speak enough about that, maybe we can get it into the conversation a little bit more.
ย้อนว่ามองนี้เคยเป็นเวียงมาแต่เก่าดวงวิญญาณของพระราชาซุมนันน่ะกำลังดูดเอาพลังจากทหารซุมนี้นี่ล่ะไปเหตุการณ์สู้รบ
Well, I think the list has got to a good place. You know, it's much wider than before. You know, I think that the river has become a delta with many, many streams. So it's more international. I still feel that there's a lot to discover. There's so much of cinema that I don't know about. I'm learning all the time, you know. So there are, like, I think of a filmmaker like Coutinho from Brazil, for example. You know, he's really great, but not talked about too much in Europe. So that would be a crucial thing. Another crucial thing for me is that European film fans, white European film fans, tend not to know very much about Indian cinema. They think it's Bollywood, as they call it, and Satyajit Ray, and that's it. And in fact, you know, I think one of the greatest Indian filmmakers is Guru Dutt, for example. So I'd love to look forward 20 years and see that his films, this is called Kagaz Ke Phool, for example. I'd love if Guru Dutt's films were considered on the same level as, say, Orson Welles.
10 महीनों के लिए करनी होगी। उसके बाद जब भी हम चाहेंगे तुम्हें तलाक देना होगा।
आपने मुझे समझ क्या रखा है? किराए का टट्टू? आप हो या आपकी भतीजी, मैं अपने आप को बेचने के लिए तैयार नहीं हूँ। नमस्ते।
पहली शर्त, शादी के बाद तुम कभी अनीता को देख भी न सकोगे। आखिरी और सबसे जरूरी शर्त, जब भी हम चाहेंगे और जिस शर्त पे चाहेंगे तुम्हें तलाक के लिए राजी।
Well, if you look at the beginning of cinema, it was very influenced by theatre and novels, Hitchcock and, you know, Cervantes, and, you know, a very big influence on cinema. But then if you look at a country like Iran, for example, Iran doesn't have a great tradition of the novel. So cinema is influenced by poetry instead. That's really good, you know. And I think that a lot of the really great filmmakers know a lot about painting. There have been many books and films about Alfred Hitchcock, you know, one of the most famous filmmakers. And I thought, what else can I say? So I watched all his films in order, all 52 of them, and I decided I would write a film by Hitchcock, narrated by Hitchcock. So he says, it starts by him saying, I've been dead a long time. Everybody else has talked about my films, now it's my turn. So for 2 hours, we hear him talking about his films, but I wrote it all. So I pretended to be Hitchcock.
Good evening. Perhaps I should explain this. My wife had these posters printed up as a joke. Of course, she doesn't really want me. Anyway, there isn't a chance I'll be recognized. They're passport photographs. This one is for going abroad, and this one for coming back.
My Name is Alfred Hitchcock is being released in Spain quite soon, I think. I think in April or something. So I might be in Spain to do some publicity there about it. It's coming out in the UK at the end of the year, coming out in America at the end of the year. It's taking a while, but it's a kind of new look at Alfred Hitchcock, not the standard way of looking at his work.
Everyone's had their say about your movies.
But now, at last, it's my turn to take you on a guided tour of my movies, my stories. Peek into my world.
Over to you, Mr. Hitchcock.